It had been a long time since Robert and Charlotte had gone out to a restaurant. Robert looked up from his phone. I can't. I have an important meeting with clients at Evening Paris. Oh, I've heard the food there is excellent. Charlotte replied. How do you know? He asked dryly. People say so, Charlotte responded quietly. After dinner, Charlotte met her best friend, Elizabeth, at a cafe. They had been friends since university. And Elizabeth always told the truth, no matter how harsh. You're pale, Elizabeth noted immediately. Robert again? Why do you think so? Charlotte tried to smile. Because I saw him last week with that, what's her name? Iris. Charlotte clutched her coffee cup tighter. Where? In the Riviera? He was there for a business meeting. They were leaving the hotel. And it definitely wasn't a business meeting, Elizabeth said, taking Charlotte's hand. Honey, you need to do something. He's just playing with you. Maybe it really was business. Charlotte protested. Oh, stop it, Elizabeth. What kind of business is settled in a hotel room? And those looks I saw, he was looking at her like before. He used to look at you like that. Charlotte felt tears welling up in her eyes. What do I do, Liz? First, stop being so naive. Gather all the proof, all the important documents. Don't show him you know. That night, Robert smelled of expensive perfume. It wasn't his usual scent. How was the meeting? Charlotte asked. Fine. We signed an important contract at Evening Paris. Yes. Why? Nothing. Just curious. Robert looked irritated. You know what? Your curiosity is starting to annoy me. I have a demanding job. Important clients. And you with your stupid questions. He went upstairs without even touching the dinner she had prepared. Charlotte sat in the kitchen, staring at the untouched dishes, remembering how they used to dine together, talking about their day, laughing. Her phone vibrated. A message from Michael. Mom. How are you? Dad isn't answering my calls. Everything's fine, son. Dad is very busy. He's been very busy for a month now. He didn't even call me on my birthday. Charlotte's heart ached. Robert had forgotten their son's birthday for the first time in 20 years. The next morning, she found an envelope on the table. Inside were documents detailing a significant money transfer to another account. What's this? She asked at breakfast. I told you. Investments. Robert replied, not looking up from his phone. By the way, I'll be late tonight. I have an important presentation at the Riviera Hotel. Robert looked up sharply. What do you mean? Nothing. Charlotte responded quickly. It's just that they usually hold business meetings there. Robert stared at her. Don't meddle in my affairs. Charlotte, you don't know anything about business anyway. That afternoon, Charlotte had a long phone conversation with Elizabeth. He's not even trying to hide it. It's like he wants me to know. Maybe he does. Her friend replied. Maybe he's too cowardly to confess. 19 years. Liz, 19 years of our lives he's ruined with his behavior. Charlotte, you have to think about yourself. Gather information, documents, anything you can. After the conversation, Charlotte took out an old box of photographs. In one, she and Robert were young and happy at a picnic. He had his arms around her, looking at her with so much love. Her thoughts were interrupted by a message. Robert had written that he would be spending the night at the hotel. I have an important meeting in the morning. I don't want to wake you up early. Charlotte looked out the window. It was raining. The raindrops slid down the glass like tears down her cheeks. But she didn't cry anymore. She started to plan. Charlotte sat in the lawyer's office for a long time, nervously clutching a folder of documents. She had told Robert she was going to the dentist 2 hours ago. The secretary broke her thoughts. Mr. Williams is expecting you. The lawyer was a middle-aged man with a kind look and confident manner. What brings you to see me? He asked when Charlotte sat down. I don't know where to begin. Start at the beginning. We have plenty of time. Charlotte took a deep breath. My husband, I think he's having an affair with a colleague. And he's transferring our joint money to another account. Mr. Williams nodded. Since when? For a few months, maybe more. I started keeping a diary. She took out a notebook. It's all here. Dates, places, conversations, restaurant and hotel receipts, bank statements. The lawyer reviewed the documents carefully. You're doing everything right, Charlotte. The documentation is very important. Do you have joint accounts? Yes, but Robert started talking about some kind of financial reorganization. What exactly is he saying? Charlotte showed him a message from her husband. We need to optimize our finances, transfer the money to another account. It's for our future. When did he write this? Yesterday, and he's already transferred a significant amount. To what account? I don't know. Mr. Williams looked at her seriously. Charlotte, listen carefully. You have rights to the property you acquired together. But we must act quickly and cautiously. After the meeting with the lawyer, Charlotte went to work. The clinic was quiet. It was lunchtime. Helen, the head nurse, called her. You're pale. Are you all right? Yes. I'm just tired. Of your husband's mistress? Helen asked suddenly. Charlotte froze. What? I'm sorry, dear, but everyone's talking about it. My niece works at the same company. She says they don't even hide it much. Charlotte felt her legs giving way. Helen quickly led her to a chair. Here, drink some water. And you know, we're all on your side. With tears in her eyes, Charlotte told her colleague everything. Helen listened attentively, nodding occasionally. My sister went through the same thing, she said finally. She also thought the world had ended. And now she's a successful woman with her own business. Everything will be all right, Charlotte. That night, when Robert was again late for an important meeting, Charlotte wrote in her diary, Robert said he's going on a business trip for 3 days. I saw a receipt from the Hotel Riviera. The room was booked for 5 days. The bank statement shows a transfer of 50,000 to an unknown account. Her phone rang. It was Iris. Mrs. Baker, it's about next week's presentation. Robert said you would help at the reception. Charlotte gripped the phone tightly. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about that. That's strange. He said he'd talk to you. He must have forgotten, Iris said, sounding unconvincingly nonchalant. After the call, Charlotte wrote in her diary, she called on purpose. She wants to show off her power. The next morning, Robert announced at breakfast, I've opened a new account for investments. What kind of account? Charlotte asked cautiously. Don't bother. Sign here. He handed her some papers. Charlotte took them with trembling hands. Can I read them first? Jesus. Charlotte, don't you trust me after all these years? She remembered her lawyer's advice. Don't sign anything without reading it and consulting me. I'm sorry, but I want to read it first. As you wish, he said, rising abruptly from the table. But don't say later that I didn't give you the opportunity to make money. That evening, Charlotte sat for a long time studying the documents. It was an order to transfer almost all their joint savings to some kind of investment account. She took photos of all the papers and then wrote in her diary, October 16th. Robert tried to make me sign the money transfer documents. I refused. He got angry. Helen came into the room. They had just finished their shift at the clinic. How are you? You know what? My sister is a financial advisor. Want me to arrange a meeting with her? Thanks, Helen. That would be great. That night, Michael called. Mom, I'm coming this weekend. Honey, don't. You have school. Mom, stop it. I see everything, and I want to be there for you. Charlotte felt her heart warm. She wasn't alone. She had a son, friends, colleagues, and she was stronger than she thought. Charlotte sat in front of her monitor and looked at her bank statement. The amount on the screen made her heart sink, 275,000. All their joint savings from 19 years of marriage. Status: transfer completed. Are you awake? Robert's voice was unusually cheerful. He entered the kitchen whistling. What's the story? Charlotte asked, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Oh, you've already seen it, he said, smiling broadly. It's our ticket to a better life. My dear. Charlotte took a deep breath. What kind of investment? A great opportunity, Iris suggested. He stopped, realizing he had said too much. I mean, our analysts recommended it. It's a very promising project. You transferred all our money without consulting me. What's to consult? He shrugged. I know more about finances than you. At that moment, his phone rang. Robert quickly left the kitchen. But Charlotte could hear him. Yes, darling. Yes, I did everything. Later that day, she met Peter, the son of her friends, who worked at the same jewelry store where she had found the receipts. Aunt Charlotte, he greeted her. What do you think of the sapphire earrings? Charlotte froze. What earrings? The ones Mr. Baker bought last week. He said they were for you. Charlotte tried to smile. Oh yes, they're very pretty, and the necklace is beautiful too. Although I personally like the earrings better. The necklace? The one he bought yesterday? He said you'd been dreaming of it for a long time. Charlotte felt nauseous. How much did these jewels cost? The earrings cost 5,000. The necklace, 8,000. Mr. Baker said you shouldn't save money when it comes to the woman you love. That night, Michael called. Mom, what's going on? I tried to contact my father. but he's not answering. Charlotte sat on the sofa. Everything is fine, son. Don't lie to me. I'm not blind. His business trips, his constant work, Michael, and that Iris. I've seen him together in the city. They don't even hide it. Her son's voice trembled with rage. I'll go. I'll talk to him. No, Charlotte said sharply. Please. But Mom, listen. His voice became firm. I appreciate your support, but this is my life and my marriage. I can handle this alone. He's cheating on you. With the money, with that woman. I know everything, but I want to solve this. My way. Promise you won't interfere. Michael was silent for a long time. Okay, but if he hurts you. He already has. Charlotte replied softly, but I'm stronger than he thinks. After talking with her son, she took her diary and wrote, today I found out about the jewelry. 13.000. He doesn't even try to hide it. The doorbell rang. A messenger was on the doorstep with a huge bouquet of roses. Mrs. Baker? No, it's not for you. He checked. The note is for Miss Iris Montgomery. Mr. Baker asked me to take it to her office. But it's closed. Could I give it to you? Charlotte took the bouquet. It had a card. To my one and only. Soon we'll be together forever. She left the flowers on the table and stared at them for a long time. Then she took her phone and photographed the bouquet and the card. A new entry appeared in her diary, October 18th. Roses for my one and only. A promise to be together. Robert returned that night. What are these flowers? The messenger made a mistake. Charlotte replied calmly. They're for Iris. Robert was confused for a moment but quickly recovered. Oh yes. It's from the company. A big contract was closed. Of course, Charlotte said, rising. She held up the Forever Love card. You read it. You know, darling. She looked him directly in the eyes. When you lie, you try to cover your lies with this. She went upstairs, leaving him standing in the middle of the living room. For the first time in all these months, she felt something akin to satisfaction. The masks were starting to fall. Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, spreading out all the evidence, restaurant receipts, photographs, cards, flowers, bank statements. 15 minutes ago, she had sent Robert a message. We need to talk. It's important. There was a bang of the door. Robert entered the kitchen, his face irritated. What's so urgent? I have an important dinner with some clients. Clients? Or with Iris? Charlotte asked calmly. Robert froze. What do you mean? Let's not pretend anymore. Charlotte began, placing the evidence on the table. Here's the bill from Evening Paris dinner for two. Champagne for $200. Here's a reservation at the Riviera, a suite for 5 days. And here, she showed a picture of a card with flowers. Is your declaration of love. You've been following me. His face flushed with anger. No, Robert, you've become too careless, too sure of your impunity. There was a heavy silence. Then Robert suddenly sat down in a chair and laughed. You know what? I'm actually glad you finally found out. Yes, I have a relationship with Iris. And you know why? Because she understands me, supports my ambitions. She doesn't stay home and play the part of the perfect wife. Charlotte felt something break inside her. I supported you for 19 years. I gave up my own career so you could build yours. Again, that song. He made a face. I didn't ask you to do that. You chose to be mediocre. Mediocre? Charlotte stood up. And what about the money? Robert, the $275,000 you transferred. Was that my mediocrity too? His face changed. This is business. You wouldn't understand. I'll try to explain. I have time, Robert said, getting up and pacing the kitchen. Fine. You want the truth? Yes. I transferred the money. And you know what? There's nothing you can do about it because all the documents are legal. In whose name? Charlotte asked softly. What does it matter? It's my money. It's our money. Robert. And you know it. He suddenly changed tactics. His voice softer. Listen, Charlotte. Let's settle this peacefully. I'll leave you the house. I'll even pay alimony, even though Michael is of age. The rest is my reward for the years spent in this marriage. At that moment, his phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Charlotte answered without taking her eyes off her husband. Yes, son, Mom, I'm coming anyway. I'm sorry, but I can't sit here waiting. Michael, don't. I already bought a ticket. I'll be there in 2 hours. Robert overheard the conversation. Oh, you've already turned my son against me. You did this yourself. You did it yourself. Charlotte replied. With every lie, with every betrayal, Her phone rang. Iris appeared on the screen. Robert didn't even try to hide the call. I have to go. I have a meeting. Of course. Charlotte nodded. Give my regards. And you know what? Tell your lady that when she receives all our money, she shouldn't forget that she earned it. Among other things. Thanks to me. He froze. What do you mean? Charlotte smiled. You'll have time to figure it out. When the door closed behind Robert, she took out her phone. She received a message from Elizabeth. How are you? We're all with you. Hold on. 2 hours later, Michael arrived. He hugged his mother tightly. I know everything. I told you not to come, said Helen. And I'm a naughty son. He tried to smile. What are we going to do? Charlotte looked at the evidence on the table. We'll fight, but smartly. I have a plan. And you know what? She smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time. Your father has no idea what a mediocre woman is capable of when cornered. Charlotte sat in the reception area of the CEO's office at the pharmaceutical company where Robert worked. She held a folder containing documents she had compiled over the past months. Mrs. Baker, the secretary opened the door to the office. Mr. Davidson is ready to see you now. Thomas Davidson, a man in his 60s, stood up to greet her. I'm surprised to hear from you. Something's wrong? Yes, Mr. Davidson, and it has to do with your company's ethical code. She opened her folder. Here are documents regarding the misuse of corporate funds, restaurant bills, hotels, gifts, all recorded as business expenses. Davidson looked at the papers attentively. These are serious accusations. I know they are, and I have proof of every word. She took out the photographs. Here are Robert and Miss Montgomery at the Evening Paris restaurant. This was a corporate dinner recorded as a client meeting. And here's a receipt from the Hotel Riviera, also noted as a business trip. Why did you decide to come to me with this? Because your company deserves the best. And because I know you value honesty. Davidson leaned back in his chair. You know, I've always considered Robert a promising leader. But lately, there have been complaints. Employees talked about favoritism, strange financial decisions. At that moment, the phone rang. Urgent sales meeting appeared on the screen. Do you mind if I leave you for a few minutes? Davidson asked. Of course. 20 minutes later, he returned, his face grim. I just had an interesting conversation. Robert was trying to reach a dubious agreement with our most important client. If it weren't for the vigilance of the finance department. He looked at Charlotte. Thank you for coming. We will conduct an internal investigation. The next day, the company was in chaos. Iris was urgently transferred to a branch in another city. Robert was removed from important projects. You stormed into the house at night. You organized everything, Robert said. Charlotte calmly sipped her tea. What exactly, Robert? Don't pretend. Davidson called me. Iris was transferred. My projects have been transferred to others. Oh, you're serious? She set down the cup. When I called you mediocre, you forgot one important thing. What is it? He gritted his teeth. I've been here for 19 years. I know all your plans. All your fraudulent documents. Robert turned white. You have no proof. Oh yes, I do. Receipts. Recordings of conversations. He sank helplessly into his chair. Why? Why did you do this? Because you forgot that I'm not just your shadow. I'm a person, and I deserve respect. At that moment, his phone rang. Robert looked at the screen and turned even paler. Iris. Breaking up. She says she doesn't want to be involved in a scandal. Charlotte stood up. You know what's the most interesting thing? I didn't even mention her name in my conversation with Davidson. I only showed him the documents about the misuse of funds. The company figured out the rest on its own. You destroyed my career. No, Robert. You destroyed it yourself with every lie. Every betrayal of trust. The following days were hard. Robert rarely came home. His colleagues, who used to envy his success, now turned their backs when they saw him. Are you okay? Michael asked, calling his mother. I am fine. For the first time in a long time. I feel strong. He called to apologize. And what did he say? That he was proud of me. Mom. Charlotte smiled. Yes, it had been a hard battle. But finally, she felt she was no longer a victim. She was a victor. The courtroom was crowded. Charlotte sat next to her lawyer, Mr. Williams, trying not to look at Robert, who was seated across the aisle. He had lost a lot of weight, and his usually impeccable suit looked rumpled. The case of divorce between Charlotte Ann Baker and Robert James Baker, announced Judge Henderson. The lawyers will now present their cases. Mr. Williams stood up. Your Honor, my client is requesting a divorce due to adultery and financial fraud on the part of her husband. We have all the necessary evidence. Robert's lawyer, a young man named Peter Monroe, also rose. Your Honor, my client doesn't deny the divorce, but he strongly disagrees with the accusations of financial fraud. The judge nodded. Very well, let's consider the evidence. Mr. Williams began to present the documents. Here are the bank statements showing the transfer of $275,000 to an external account without Mrs. Baker's knowledge or consent. Here are the documents regarding the jointly acquired property. And here is the evidence of adultery. Robert paled at the sight of the photographs, receipts, and recordings of conversations. Mr. Baker, the judge said to Robert, do you have any comments on this evidence? Robert stood up, his voice trembling. Your Honor, I admit my mistakes, but the money was transferred for legitimate investments. The judge looked over her glasses. Why was it transferred to Mrs. Montgomery's personal account? A murmur went through the courtroom. Robert turned sharply towards his lawyer. Where did they get this? A financial audit. Mr. Baker, the judge calmly replied. It's standard procedure in a divorce. During the break, Robert approached Charlotte. We need to talk. It's all been said, Robert. He lowered his voice. I can get back all the money. The house. Charlotte looked at him. And my trust? 19 years of my life? You can get that back, too. At that moment, Michael entered the room. Son, Robert rushed towards him. You have to understand me. Understand what? Dad, Michael asked coldly. How you cheated on Mom. How you spent our family's money on your lover. Robert reached for his son's hand. It's not that simple. It is, Dad. It's called betrayal. And you know what? You didn't just betray Mom. You betrayed us all. After the break, the trial resumed. Robert's lawyer tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, my client is willing to reach a settlement. He will return all the money. It's very generous of him to return what rightfully belongs to his wife. Mr. Williams interrupted. The judge studied the documents carefully. Mr. Baker, understand that your actions could have serious consequences. Concealment of community property. Embezzlement of funds. Robert stood up. Your Honor, I would like to make a statement. Yes, I made mistakes, but I'm willing to fix them. He turned to Charlotte. I was selfish. I forgot how much you've done for me. Mr. Baker, the judge interrupted. This is a court, not a confessional. We have facts. We have evidence. And they speak for themselves. After 4 hours of hearing, the judge announced her decision. Considering all the circumstances of the case, the court decides to dissolve the marriage, divide the jointly acquired assets equally, including all funds transferred to third-party accounts. Mr. Baker is ordered to return $75 within 30 days. Robert sat with his head bowed. His world was crumbling before his eyes. His reputation was destroyed. His lover had left, and his son had turned his back on him. After the hearing, a former colleague approached him. Robert, the board of directors wants to talk to you tomorrow at 10. Why? You understand, all this is bad for the company's reputation. Charlotte watched her ex-husband walk slowly towards the exit. The man who was once powerful and self-assured now seemed broken. Are you okay? Michael asked, hugging his mother. Yes, she smiled. You know, I don't feel joy or sadness. I feel freedom. They left the courthouse. It was spring outside, and for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt she could breathe freely. Several months passed. Charlotte sat in her new office, reviewing documents. She had invested part of her settlement in a small medical clinic where she had previously worked as an administrator. Now she was a co-owner. Mrs. Baker, sorry, Miss White, the young nurse corrected herself. Using Charlotte's maiden name, you have a patient who wants to see you. Smiling, she thought that returning to her maiden name was one of the first steps towards a new life. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Robert had lost even more weight, and his suit hung on him like a coat rack. Can I come in? His voice was uncertain. What do you want, Robert? To talk. Please. Charlotte indicated a chair. I have 5 minutes. I wanted to apologize. I messed everything up. My work. My family. My reputation. Where's Iris? Charlotte asked calmly. She married a businessman from Chicago. Charlotte nodded. And that's why you're here? Because she left you? Robert hung his head. No, I'm here because I finally realized how stupid I've been. You were by my side for 19 years. You supported me, believed in me, and I ruined it all. Charlotte finished for him. You know, I've been thinking for a long time about what I did wrong. Where I went wrong, and then I realized it wasn't me. It was you, your greed, your selfishness. At that moment, her phone rang. Michael, I'm sorry, I have to answer, she said to Robert. Yes, son, Mom, I got the job, the one you told me about. Oh, that's great. Congratulations. Robert watched her happy face as she spoke with her son. It had been a long time since he had seen Charlotte like this. Michael got the job? He asked when she finished talking. Yes, at a tech company, but you'd know that if you kept in touch with him. Robert sighed. He doesn't return my calls. What did you expect? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed his trust too. There was a knock at the door, and Helen entered. Charlotte, I'm sorry, but the investors are waiting for the presentation. It's in 10 minutes. Investors? Robert asked, surprised. Yes, Charlotte replied, gathering documents. We're expanding. We're opening a new branch. She looked at her ex-husband. You know what's funny? You always thought I was mediocre. And now look who's more successful. Robert stood up. Is there anything I can do to help? I have some contacts. No, thanks. Charlotte interrupted. I can manage on my own, as I have for the past few months. When he left, Charlotte remained by the window for a long time, remembering their life together, the good times, the bad times, everything they had lived through. That night, Elizabeth called. I heard your husband came to see you. He regretted it. You know, Charlotte thought, before his visit, it would have turned my whole life upside down. And now it's just a visit from an ex-husband. Now you're stronger, Liz. I'm finally myself again. The next day, Charlotte made a presentation to investors. Her project to expand the clinic aroused great interest. Impressive, one of the investors said after the presentation. How long have you been in business? 6 months. Charlotte smiled. But I learned fast. That afternoon, she met with Michael, who had come to spend the weekend. How are you, Mom? Your father came yesterday. I know. He called. He asked to see me. Charlotte looked at her son. And what did you decide? I said I'd think about it. But you know, I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm proud of you too. For how you've overcome everything. She hugged her son. You know what helped me the most? Understanding that I'm not alone. That I have you, my friends, and a job I love. That same night, Charlotte wrote in her diary, today I realized that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And this is the most valuable discovery of my life. A year passed like a day. Charlotte stood by the window of her new house, smaller than the previous one, but much cozier. Her phone vibrated. A message from Michael. Mom, we're leaving. We'll be there in 2 hours. Kate is very excited. Charlotte began to prepare dinner. Tonight, Michael was bringing his girlfriend to meet her for the first time. She put on her best outfit, a new one, bought to celebrate this happy moment in her life. The doorbell rang. Elizabeth and her husband arrived. Well, are you ready for the role of future mother-in-law? Her friend joked. Oh, don't get me started. Charlotte laughed. I'm too young for such an honorable title. Helen, who arrived a few minutes later, brought a cake. We have to celebrate. Have you seen the article? Our clinic is now on the front page. And not only that, Elizabeth added, have you heard? Our Charlotte has been nominated for the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Charlotte blushed. Not at all. It's thanks to our team. Don't be modest. Helen interrupted. Do you know how many patients come thanks to your social support program? 2 hours later, Michael arrived with Kate, a pretty girl with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. Charlotte took a liking to her immediately. During dinner, Kate talked about her work at the Children's Hospital. When I read about your initiative to provide free medical checkups to low-income families, I understood why Michael is so proud of you. It's very important to give people the opportunity to receive quality medical care. Charlotte smiled. You know, sometimes people just need support at the right time. I understand that very well, Mom, Kate said. Tell Kate about the new project. Michael suggested. Charlotte enthusiastically talked about her plans to open a specialized ward for the elderly. You see, many pensioners can't afford quality healthcare. We want to change this situation. And you know what? Helen added. The investors have already confirmed the funding. Later, when the young people went out to the garden, and Helen and her husband and Elizabeth were playing board games on the terrace, Elizabeth took her friend aside. Who would have thought a year ago that things would turn out this way? Look at you. A successful business, a new house, a happy son. You're radiant. Charlotte sat thoughtfully, looking out the window. You know what I've learned this year? Happiness isn't about meeting someone else's expectations. Happiness is the freedom to be yourself. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from the director of a local charity organization. Thank you for supporting our Christmas program. Thanks to your clinic, 50 children will receive the treatment they need. Charlotte showed Elizabeth the message. This is what it's all about. Not articles and awards. It's always been like this. They just never let you spread your wings. That night, when the guests had left, and Michael and Kate had gone, Charlotte went out to the terrace. The snow was still falling, covering everything with a white blanket. A new beginning, a blank page. Charlotte saw a different woman, confident, strong, happy, the woman she had always been inside, but who had been afraid to show the world. Tomorrow would be a new day, new challenges, new opportunities, and she was ready for them all.